Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming this evening. My name is Lindsay White-Dasher. I am the Director of Humane Wildlife Conflict Resolution for the Humane Society of the United States. I travel, me and my staff travel all around the country doing talks like this about solving conflicts with wildlife. And we also do trainings for animal control and police officers. My specialty is coyotes. My background is in human-wildlife conflicts. I have a master's degree in conservation biology and sustainable development. And my background with coyotes involves two parts. I worked for the Cook County Coyote Project, which is the largest study of urban coyotes in the country. It takes place in the greater Chicago metropolitan area, and I'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And I also did a publication looking at all of the incidents of coyote attacks on people in the United States and Canada that I could find from the early 1900s through now. So before I start, I always like to get a little poll of the audience. How many of you have seen a coyote in your neighborhood? By a show of hands. Most of you. Okay. And how many of you are concerned about coyotes possibly in your neighborhood because you have pets? Okay, just a couple. Okay. What about concerns about attacks on kids or possibly yourself by a coyote? Okay. Okay, so I'll talk about all of those things this evening, and when you leave, you'll have a lot of great information that I hope that you'll share with your family, neighbors, and friends. So today I will start with a basic background in coyote ecology and behavior. I'll talk about why we have coyotes in Seal Beach in the first place, how to solve coyote conflicts, and just as a preview, that will involve not only changing problematic coyote behavior, but also changing some of our behaviors that contribute to that. And then I'll give some tips for coexistence. Okay, so I always like to start with a background in basic coyote ecology and behavior. Because if we want to change some of the problematic behaviors of coyotes, we have to understand why they're doing what they're doing in the first place and learn to think like a coyote a little bit. Okay, so a lot of you said that you've seen a coyote in your neighborhood before, so you already know what a coyote looks like. For those of you that haven't, they look like this. They're actually a lot smaller than most people realize. Most coyotes in this area are only 25 to 35 pounds. They look a lot bigger because they have these really long legs and these bushy coats, especially in the wintertime. So they might look like the size of a German Shepherd, but they're actually much smaller. They have these very large pointed ears, and in contrast to a domestic dog, for example, they have these nice striking yellow eyes. And they also have a black-tipped tail that's usually held downward. So dogs usually hold their tails upward when they walk, and coyotes hold their tails downward. You might also see foxes in your area. This is a red fox. They're the most common foxes in urban areas. And they look different from a coyote in several ways. First of all, they're much smaller. They're about half the size. But also, they have a white-tipped tail, which is in contrast to the black-tipped tail of a coyote. Okay, so you might not actually see coyotes in your neighborhood, but you might see signs of them or hear signs of them. So coyotes do designate their territory by leaving scat or droppings around. So if you see those prominently, it might be a coyote signaling to other coyotes that this is their territory. Coyote scat looks similar to dog scat, except it often contains fur. So you'll see pieces of fur in there, which are typically from rodents, or you might even see some bones. Or you might see tracks. Coyote tracks look similar to tracks from a domestic dog, but if you can see the claw marks, you usually only see the innermost claw marks from a coyote, where with dog tracks you usually see all of the claw marks. Also, if you can see the whole line of tracks, that's also helpful. Coyote tracks tend to go in a straight line. They tend to go in a very determined path from point A to B, whereas domestic dog tracks tend to meander all around, sniffing this thing and that. Especially if they're anything like my dog when I'm walking her. Okay, so how many of you hear coyotes in your neighborhood? Okay. Yeah, so, coyotes can actually make a lot of different sounds, not just howls, but yips and barks and whines. A lot of times they actually sound more like a domestic dog than like a coyote. All also, they have this interesting ability to throw their voice around and make themselves sound like a much larger group of coyotes than they are. So 2 or 3 coyotes can actually sound like 20 or 30 coyotes. So I often get calls from people saying, they can hear the coyotes howling behind their house and there's 30 of them. It's probably only 3 or 4 coyotes. They just want the other coyote groups around to think that there's 30 or 40 of them. Another common misconception are that people think when they hear coyotes howling that means that they've celebrated a kill. But coyotes actually don't hunt in packs like wolves. They're primarily eating very small prey items like mice and rats and squirrels. So that's not something that they need a pack to take down. At the same time, that's not a large enough meal to share with other coyotes. At the same time, if you think about it, if they had made a kill, would they want to broadcast that to other coyote groups? No, so that's not what they're doing. When they're howling, they're actually either communicating with other coyotes in their group, especially during pup season, or they're defending their territory. So they're making themselves sound like a very large coyote group to keep other coyote groups away. Also, if any of you live near a police station or a fire station, you might notice coyotes howling at the sirens going by. That's an interesting thing that we've noticed. There was a graduate student out of Ohio State University who was studying coyote vocalization, and she was going out and playing recordings of coyotes to try to elicit vocalizations from other coyotes in the area, and she wasn't having any luck with that. But she noticed every time a police siren or ambulance siren came by, the coyote started howling at that. So eventually she just started playing recordings of sirens, and then the coyotes started howling at that. So we don't know why they do that, but just an interesting tidbit. Okay, so coyotes are actually native to the central grasslands of North America, and you can see by their body type how they're well adapted to that. They have these nice long legs that allow them to run through tall grasses in search of their prey, which are typically rodents again, like mice and rats. Those long legs also allow them to run really fast. They are actually the 3rd fastest land mammal in North America. Does anybody know what the 1st and 2nd fastest are? Mountain lion is number 2. Number 1 could be a prey item for a mountain lion. Not a jackrabbit. Not a deer, but an ungulate. Yes, a pronghorn antelope is number 1. So now you all have that fun trivia fact to leave with, if nothing else. So they're incredibly fast. And they are always going to run when faced with a threat. And that'll become important later on when I get to hazing. So they're very fast. They're also incredibly smart. If any of you or your kids or your grandkids have watched the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons, those poor coyotes were portrayed so horribly. In real life, they're actually very smart. They wouldn't fall for all those silly Acme products and just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. In true life, in real world, they're actually very smart. They learn very quickly, and they use that information to live in our urban areas and do really well and be successful. They're also incredibly flexible in where they can live. They can live just about anywhere, including in really urbanized areas. Also, coyotes will eat just about everything. A lot of people are surprised to learn that coyotes are not true carnivores. They're actually opportunistic omnivores and also scavengers. So they really will eat just about anything. If there are less rodents or less rabbits one year, they can switch to another animal. And that's one of the reasons why they do so well. No matter what else is going on in the environment or ecosystem, they always have something to eat. So again, their biggest source of prey are small rodents, mice and rats. A lot of us wouldn't mind having less of those in our neighborhoods. So they're actually providing us a service by feasting on rodents like mice and rats. Also squirrels. These numbers here come from the Cook County Coyote Project that I mentioned in the Chicago area. So these coyotes are living in a city, a large city amongst a lot of people. And another thing that people find surprising is that, especially in urban areas, coyotes eat a lot of fruit. So here in the Chicago area, they were about 1/4 of their diet in urban areas was made up of fruit. But in more southern parts of the U.S., other diet studies in Arizona and New Mexico have shown up to half of their diet in urban areas is made up of fruit. So if you or someone in your neighborhood has fruit trees and the fruit has fallen on the ground, that's a surprising attractant for coyotes that a lot of people don't think about. So if you have that, our suggestion is just after the fruit has fallen on the ground, just pick it up before it starts fermenting. Because when it ferments, that's when, they smell it and it attracts them in. Okay, so they also eat a variety of other things. As I mentioned, they're also scavengers of roadkill items. A lot of times when people find coyotes eating on a larger prey item, it's often a roadkill or something that they're scavenging. Okay, so I want to pay special attention to these numbers. So again, these are coyotes living in the Chicago area. They're living amongst a lot of people, one of the biggest cities in the US. And even still, only 2% of their diet was shown to be from human-associated food. And that would include garbage, pet food, that sort of thing. And only 1% showed the remains of a domestic cat. And anytime there's a coyote attack on a pet, and I know that there's been several coyote attacks on pets in Seal Beach, it's always a tragic event. We love our pets. At HSUS, we love pets, of course. Pets are our family. But at the same time, these events get widely covered in the media, and it makes it sound like these events are happening much more than they really are. But really, the vast majority of coyotes are leaving pets alone. There's plenty for them to eat in urban areas without ever bothering our pets. Okay, in terms of the social structure for coyotes, there are two different types. The main one we think of are the resident coyotes. These are the coyotes that live in the family groups. Similar to wolves, there's only one breeding pair, the alpha male and female in the group, and then some other individuals that are often related females. Because they live in these groups, they're able to defend their territories. So because they're actively defending their territories, they typically have smaller home ranges. In contrast, we have what we call transient coyotes. These are either solitary coyotes or it could be a mated pair. And essentially, these are guys that are just out there looking for an open home range they can move into and call home. Because it's only one or two coyotes, they don't have the manpower to defend their home range against other coyotes. So they typically have these larger overlapping home ranges. And again, just waiting for a new one to open up that they can settle into. There are 3 basic seasons biologically for coyotes, and they all have different possible implications for conflicts with people and pets. So the first one is mating season, which we're coming into here soon. Typically starts in December or January and goes through March. Coyotes are very monogamous. They're one of the only mammals, or perhaps the only mammal that is truly monogamous. Dr. Stan Garrett is the head of the Cook County Coyote Project, and he's been quoted several times as saying that he's never documented a case of divorce amongst coyotes in the wild. They've also done a lot of analysis of the DNA of the pups and different members of the family groups, and they found no instances of cheating, which again is very rare, especially in mammals. And we think one of the reasons for this is because both the male and the female do very actively aid in the raising of the pups, and the survival of the pups is very important to have both parents. So evolutionarily, this has sort of happened. So because they're so monogamous, they're also very territorial of their mate. So this time of year, the male is very protective of his female. So sometimes this time of year, we see conflicts with larger dogs that are off-leash. So if a coyote has a large off-leash dog wandering into his territory, he might view that as a threat to his mate. So even though attacks on larger dogs are very rare, when they do happen, they usually happen this time of year, and again, it's usually an off-leash dog. Okay, the next season is pup rearing season. This, of course, is when the pups are born, typically born in April or May. This is the only time of year that coyotes use a den. So a lot of people mistakenly think that coyotes have a den all year round. They're looking for the den, trying to figure out where it is. But really, this is the only time of year that they use the den. And it's only for about 6 weeks while the pups are too small. Once the pups get old enough, they go out hunting with the parents and they leave the den. So potential conflicts during this time of year are often with, well, not often, but when they do happen, they are usually with unattended, free-roaming small pets. So this time of year, if there are cats or small dogs that are roaming around unattended, especially if it's near a coyote's den, the coyotes are hunting double time to feed their pups, they might view that as a potential prey item for their pups. Also, we tend to see more daytime sightings of coyotes during this time of year, and again, that's just because they need to be out more hunting for their pups. Again, usually hunting rodents and not doing anything wrong, but people often are alarmed when they see coyotes during the day. The next season is dispersal season. That's sort of what we're on the tail end of now. This is the time of year when the yearlings from the year before are kicked out of the family group and they become those transient coyotes looking for their own place to call home. We typically have less conflicts this time of year, but sometimes we have conflicts with these younger, inexperienced males that aren't that great at hunting yet. And so if someone's leaving pet food outside or an easy source of food, they might take advantage of that. Okay, so again, coyotes can really live just about anywhere. When the Cook County Coyote Project started, they sort of expected to see most of the coyote activity in these large blocks of forest preserves that they have in the Chicago area, but they soon realized that coyotes were everywhere. They were right inside housing developments and next to shopping malls and highway embankments. They were just everywhere, and most of the time people had absolutely no idea that they were there. When I tell people that I worked for the Cook County Coyote Project, they think that's very interesting and I must have been out there tracking the coyotes, and I tell them that actually no, I was stuck at a computer at Ohio State University going through the radio collar data, like a nerd in a cubicle. But one time I got to go to Chicago and I was very excited because I had never seen a coyote before at that point. And I got to ride around in the truck where we tracked the radio collared coyotes, and I thought, this is going to be so exciting, I'm going to get to see the coyotes. Nope, I didn't see one coyote all night long, even though we were within 20 or 30 feet of them, because they were so well hidden that even though we knew exactly where they weren't showing themselves to us. And that's because they're so good at hiding and avoiding us. Have any of you seen this picture before, besides those that were in the earlier session? Okay, so this is the picture of a coyote in, so there was a Quiznos sub shop in the middle of downtown Chicago, right in the heart of downtown Chicago, and it was a warm spring day, and the staff had left the door open to, get a nice breeze and entice people to come in. And this coyote, in the middle of the daytime, just wandered in off the street, went into the Quiznos, tried to jump up and over the sandwich counter, didn't make it, settled into the Snapple cooler, and just sat there like this. There's lots of pictures like this you can see online. Continued sitting there. They called animal control, who, eventually came and got the coyote. In the meantime, some people continued eating their sandwiches, and of course this was a huge story in the 5 o'clock news, so reporters came and they interviewed the staff and the customers and just people walking down the street. But what I find interesting about this story is not just that this happened and this funny picture I can show, but it was the public's reaction to it. And so people were getting interviewed, and what they kept saying was, well, why the heck is there a coyote in downtown Chicago? We don't have coyotes in downtown Chicago. And the truth is there are a lot of coyotes in downtown Chicago. If you look at the footage from the traffic cameras, you can see them crossing the street in the middle of the night. Most coyotes are just not doing this, so people have no idea that they're there. Coyotes have been in Southern California and Seal Beach for a very long time too, at least 100 years. And it's amazing how many people still have no idea that they're here as well. So coyotes are very good at avoiding us, letting us, keeping away from us. We've also found within their home ranges that they will go out of their way to spend most of their time in the more natural parts of their home ranges. So even coyotes that have very urbanized home ranges, we found they'll spend most of their time or more of their time in the little patches of natural areas. They also will become more nocturnal. So coyotes are naturally diurnal. They're naturally most active at dawn and dusk and active during the daytime. But in urban areas, we found them shifting to a more nocturnal activity. And again, that's to avoid us. Okay, a lot of people want to know about coyote mortality and how long can they live. In captivity, coyotes could have the same average lifespan as a domestic dog. They could live to be 13 to 15 years old. Interestingly, the very first coyote that was ever radio collared as a part of the Cook County Coyote Project in 2000 lived to be 11, which is very rare, and she had a very urbanized home range. But unfortunately, the average age for urban coyotes is 3 years old. Traffic is their biggest cause of mortality, and then disease. Rabies is very rare in coyotes. We hardly ever see it, but mange is a common disease. So mange is caused by a parasite. It is curable by a rehabber, but generally in the wild it's generally fatal. It causes them to lose their hair, especially in colder areas, makes them to succumb to the climate, and makes them more weak and not as good at hunting. So generally, coyotes that have mange, people might see them looking weak and possibly languishing in yards. It doesn't make them aggressive at all. But of course, if you see anything like that, you should call animal control. Okay, so why are there coyotes in Seal Beach? Well, as I talked about, there's plenty of habitat. They're not picky. They will live anywhere. And there's plenty of food. There's plenty of mice and rats, rabbits, plenty of things for them to eat. So a thing that I commonly hear from people are that coyotes have come into our neighborhood to eat our cats and our dogs because they've run out of food from wherever they were before. Or I know there's been a drought this year and people are saying coyotes have come in because of the drought. And that to some extent could be true. There are a lot of artificial sources of water that could be drawing coyotes in. But the truth is, coyotes were already here. There's plenty for coyotes to eat here without ever bothering our pets. But perhaps the most important reason why we have coyotes here and in any urban area is because they have no competition. We don't really have big predators like mountain lions or bears or wolves in urban areas. Coyotes are really the biggest top predator, and so they do really well. Okay, so there's plenty for them to eat in urban areas without ever bothering our pets or us. But as I mentioned, coyotes are very smart. So they're going to eat whatever is easiest to eat, just like any smart animal would. If we're making it easy for them by providing a free buffet of dog food or garbage or fruit on the ground, they're going to take advantage of that. So all of these sources of food can attract coyotes into neighborhoods and potentially cause greater conflicts. Bird feeders, they're not attracted to the bird seed, but if there's a lot of spilled bird seed on the ground, that attracts rodents that could attract coyotes, all of these other ones I've mentioned. And then unattended small pets, so cats that are roaming around outside or small dogs that are roaming around outside unattended can also attract coyotes into neighborhoods. And I'll talk more about pets in a few moments. But of course, the worst is intentional feeding. Hopefully nobody in your neighborhood is purposely feeding coyotes or especially hand feeding coyotes, because that is the easiest way to lead to conflicts with coyotes. But people might not be intentionally feeding coyotes. They might be leaving out food for raccoons or squirrels or cats. But coyotes, of course, don't care who the food was left out for. They're going to take advantage of it. So if nothing else, the best way to prevent coyote conflicts is to make sure there's no intentional feeding going on, and then also these other food attractants that they are reduced. Okay, so how do we prevent coyote conflicts from happening in the first place? Well, the biggest coyote conflict that I normally hear about are just people seeing coyotes, and that's often perceived to be a conflict. So especially when people see coyotes during the day, they think that the coyote is rabid or sick or aggressive, but just simply seeing a coyote during the day doesn't mean that it's aggressive or sick. As I mentioned before, it's actually normal for coyotes to be out during the day, especially in the spring and summer when they have more hunting to do to feed their pups. So just seeing a coyote during the day is really nothing to be concerned about. However, they should run away from you. Coyotes are naturally very afraid of people, and so they should run away from you when they see you. If they don't, they could be what we call habituated. All coyotes to some extent are habituated to urban life. They get used to traffic and car, all the different disturbances that we create. But sometimes in urban areas, coyotes learn that people are nothing to be afraid of. And I say learn because coyotes that are habituated have learned this from us. So, a lot of you raised your hand and said that you've seen a coyote. And I won't pick on anybody here and ask you what you did when you saw a coyote, but I'll tell you what I did when I finally saw a coyote. Years after my Chicago trip, I just stood there and I looked at him. And I probably would have taken a picture if I had a camera. That was back before smartphones. But, what message was I sending to that coyote at that time? I was sending to him, I'm nothing to be afraid of. You're perfectly welcome here. And that's what, if that's what you all are doing, that's the message you're sending to them too. And so without realizing it, we have actually taught coyotes to be habituated. And how it generally happens is that a coyote generally learns that they can come into a neighborhood, get a nice, free, easy source of food, and nothing bad happens to them. And then they will sort of escalate that behavior. So a common story that I hear is that, we used to occasionally see a coyote or two, every now and then. Then there were 2 coyotes. Now our neighborhood is overrun with coyotes. I hear that a lot. And generally why that happens is because one coyote learns they can come into the outskirts of a community and eat perhaps some overflowing garbage. Nothing bad happens to them. The next time they come into somebody's yard, they eat the fruit off the ground. Nothing bad happens to them. Maybe next time they go up on somebody's porch and eat the cat food out of the bowl. Nothing bad happens to them. Not only that, but they share this information with the rest of their family group. And so you had one coyote, now you have two, and now you have three, and the message spreads really quickly. So the good news there is that we can take advantage of that and reverse that behavior, which I'll get to when I talk about hazing. Okay, so will coyotes attack pets? This is generally the most serious and concerning conflict that we deal with. And again, as I mentioned, we all love our pets, and so of course we always want to avoid this from happening. Again, I mentioned that most coyotes are not bothering pets. Most of them are happily hunting rodents and not ever bothering us or our pets. But as we know, sometimes they do attack pets. Generally, the attacks are on unattended pets. And by unattended, I mean pets so either cats that are outside, they're not on a leash, or small dogs, well, any dog that is either not on a leash or there's not a person within 6 feet of them. So it could include even a pet that's outside in a fenced yard, especially if that fence is not coyote-proof. So when a coyote sees a cat or a small unattended dog, that animal does not look any different to them than a woodchuck or a rabbit, for example. That looks like an available prey item. So number one, that means that those animals are in danger of coyote attack. But number two, it does not mean, and this is something I commonly hear from people, it does not mean that because a coyote attacked an unattended pet, that now it's going to attack a child. That's a common concern I hear. Coyotes attacked a cat, next it's going to attack my kid or my grandkid. And I understand that concern, but it's just, it's not true because they're two completely different things. The coyote views a small mammal as potential prey. It knows what a person is. They're two completely different things. When a dog is on a leash or next to us, then the coyote should be afraid of us and run away. So that's why it's so important that pets are always with us. Larger breed dogs, it's much more rare for coyotes to attack larger breed dogs. As I mentioned before, when this happens, it's usually during the breeding season. And it's usually an off-leash dog that the coyote views as a threat to his mate. Or it could be if there is a larger off-leash dog around a den. They could view that as a threat to their pups. Although generally coyotes are not that defensive of their den unless there's a very immediate threat to their pups. If there's any sort of activity around their den, they'll usually just move the pups. And females might move their pups several times throughout the year. So in terms of protecting our pets, it's really about just taking some extra precautions ourselves. So again, the best way to protect pets is to always be with them when they're outside, to use leashes that are 6 feet long or less. If you have one of those extendable leashes and your pet is 20 feet away from you, a coyote might not even realize that dog is on a leash. So we recommend 6 feet long or less. If you see a coyote and you're outside, and you're with your pet, if it's a small pet, we recommend picking up the pet and sort of putting them behind you. If it's a larger dog, if possible, we recommend pulling the dog in close to you and behind you as well. That way you can get the coyote to focus on you and scare them away. I always feel silly having to mention this one, but you should never allow your dog to play with the coyote. I do know people that have done this, and it looks like fun at first, but dogs don't understand coyote body language, and it can get aggressive pretty fast. So we never want to do that. Okay, so just to recap, with small dogs, it's especially important that you're always with them outside and they're on a leash, and with large dogs, be extra vigilant during that breeding season. Okay, so cats. As you probably all know or have heard, the only 100% foolproof way to protect your cats, not just from coyotes, but from other wildlife, from cars, diseases, dogs, even people sometimes, is to keep them inside all the time. And at HSUS, we definitely recommend keeping cats inside all the time. We have a lot of resources on this on our website here, where you can get information about how to make the transition of your cat to an indoor cat and keep them stimulated and enriched, and all of those things. However, there are ways that you can let your cat enjoy the outdoors safely, and everybody laughs at this when I recommend it, but you can use a leash and a harness. And I actually do this. I take my cats outside with a leash and a harness in my fenced yard, and my neighbors think I'm nuts. And I'm not trying to walk the cat around, obviously, the block, because they're cats and they don't do that. But I allow them to, lay in the grass, and they roll around in it, and then they eat the grass, and they throw it up later, and, they can watch the birds, but they enjoy themselves, and I know that they're safe. Or you can use something like this, a cat enclosure. This is not coyote proof. You couldn't put your cat in this and then go to work for the day, but if you're out there with them, this is something you could use. Or, of course, the ultimate, a catio, the new trend in cat wear. This is, it's a secure enclosure, secure on top and all around, and then your cats can enjoy the outdoors and you know that they're safe. Okay, so again, if I can't emphasize enough, we strongly recommend keeping cats inside, especially, when you're not out there with them. If for whatever reason, you're still going to let your cat outside, or if you help care for a feral cat colony, there are some things you can do to help lower the risk, although there always will be a risk. The most important thing you can do is control the food. So you don't want to leave cat food outside that will attract coyotes to the cat food and then endanger the cats. So what we recommend is if it's a pet cat, of course, we recommend feeding them inside. If you're taking care of a feral cat colony, we recommend feeding them once per day, putting the food out just once per day, and then removing it as soon as they're done, just so you're not leaving the food there. And then you can try some different providing escape routes or posts or places for the cats to go and hide. We have some information about that on our website as well. Okay, if I haven't said this enough, the best protection is to never let pets outdoors unattended. In terms of fences, a lot of people are surprised to learn that coyotes can jump over fences that are 6 feet tall. If you have a fence that is less than 6 feet tall, they can jump over no problem. So if your pet is if you have a fenced yard and your fence is less than 6 feet tall, your pet is an unattended pet outside unless you're with them. If your fence is at least 6 feet tall, what they have to do is jump up onto the fence and then push off and go over. I'll show you a figure of that in a moment. So there are some things you can do to the top of the fence that keep them from doing that. You also want to make sure that the bottom of your fence is reinforced so they can't dig under. You might want to consider thinning out or removing thick brush around your house that could provide a hiding place for coyotes. Again, you want to look around your yard, look around your neighborhood, talk to your neighbors, see if you have any of these food attractants that could be luring a coyote in, which could endanger your pets. You could try looking into devices like motion-activated sprinklers. I don't have a lot of good data about how effective that is for coyotes, but I do know they're effective for other animals like rabbits and deer and Canada geese, for example, so that's something that you could try. Okay, so these are just a few images to sort of illustrate a bit about what I was talking about with the fences. So if you can imagine this was someone's yard here, and I don't think you can see very well, but this is just a standard 4-foot tall chain link fence. And then of course there's all this brush where a coyote could be hiding. And so a typical story that I hear when someone's pet has been taken from a yard goes something like this. And the person lets their dog outside every morning at 6 a.m. They go back inside to have their coffee. They've been doing this for years, and they've never had a problem. And then all of a sudden, one morning, they let their dog outside at 6 a.m. They're back inside for less than a minute. All of a sudden, they hear a commotion. They go out, and they see a coyote running off with their pet. And it sounds like this just happened all of a sudden. But really, this probably has been in the works for some time. So coyotes are very knowledgeable about everything going on in their home range. They know all the dogs, they know the people. If you walk your dog every day at 5:30 p.m. along a certain route, they probably know that. And for the most part, they use this information to avoid us and stay hidden. But sometimes, especially during pup season, if they're looking to feed their pups, they might use the information another way. So this coyote knows this dog goes out every morning at 6 a.m. And one morning, the coyote trying to feed her pups, sitting there waiting, and then in just a matter of seconds can come and grab the dog and take off with it. So in contrast, this yard, you still have this 4-foot chain link fence that doesn't provide any protection at all, but at least you don't have all of this brush here to provide coyote hiding spots. Now, we don't recommend, of course, that you remove all your vegetation because that's good for other wildlife and the earth, of course. But you can thin it out or trim up underneath it a little bit just so you can see that there's not a coyote hiding there. And then, of course, with a fence like this, we would always encourage you to be outside with your dog since this fence is not coyote proof. This is an unattractive, I will admit, but an inexpensive option for securing the top of your fence if it's at least 6 feet tall. So this would keep a coyote from jumping over the fence if it's at least 6 feet tall. A better option is called a coyote roller, and you can order these on coyoteroller.com. So what these are they're very loosely rolling pipes, and as the coyote tries to get over the fence, so again, these only work with fences at least 6 feet tall, the coyote has to sort of scramble up on the top and push off and over. And because the bar rolls so loosely, they can't get a grip and get over, they get rolled backwards. So it's really effective for keeping coyotes out of yards, and if you have a dog that escapes, it keeps the dog in your yard too. So it works double time. These are really great. You can get different colors to match your fence. Depending on how big your yard is and how long your fence is, these can be pretty pricey, but you can try and make it your own version with PVC piping and just roll it very loosely, and that would have the same effect. Okay, so beyond pet attacks, the most serious conflict that people are often worried about when they find out there's coyotes in their neighborhood are coyotes attacking people. The truth is, these incidents are very rare. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I did research looking at all of the documented incidents of coyotes attacking people throughout the US and Canada from the early 1900s through now, and published a paper on this. And we found an average of less than 10 bites a year. And compared to the number of dog bites, which is almost 5 million a year, that's a very small number. Also, most of these involve minor injuries, single bites to the extremities. We found just as many adults were bitten as kids, so there's a misconception that coyotes are after kids, but we found just as many adults bitten as kids. And in the ones where there was good information about the incident, most of them were pet-related or feeding-related. So pet-related would include people who came outside to discover a coyote was attacking their pet, tried to get the pet back, it was bitten that way. Feeding related could be someone purposely hand feeding a coyote. Many of you, or some of you might be familiar with 1983. There was a 3-year-old girl that was killed in Glendale, California. She's the only person in the US that has been killed by a coyote. Unfortunately, her parents had been hand feeding that coyote. So that is the easiest way to lead to conflicts. Some of them are not as obvious. Another obvious case was a McDonald's drive-through, a restaurant in Colorado, where the employees had been feeding a coyote French fries through the window. And it sounds funny, but then unfortunately an elderly woman came up and placed her order, and the coyote came up to her window, and she didn't give the coyote any French fries. She didn't know, and he bit her. And so there are also a lot of incidents in Colorado where people, tourists come, they see a coyote, they think it's cute and funny to feed the coyote. Other tourists come along, the coyote comes up and bites them. So a lot of these are, these single bites where we definitely think it's because people have been feeding them. And a lot of times it's not the victim that was feeding them, it was somebody else. So, but whenever these incidents happen, of course, we do take them very seriously. And we recommend that as much information be compiled about the attack as possible so that we can prevent it from happening again. But we also do want to take into account, the actual risk. So you're actually more likely to be killed by a champagne cork, so be careful this New Year's Eve, or by a golf ball, those of you golfers, than you are to be bitten by a coyote. So, the odds here are actually very small. In terms of kids, as I mentioned, we didn't find any more kids were, bitten than adults, but we do want to take some, extra precautions with kids as we do with everything. Hopefully small kids are not unattended outside. For a lot of reasons. Hopefully they're within shouting distance of an adult. If a child sees a coyote, they should be big and loud. They can use all the hazing techniques I'll talk about later. The most important thing is that they never run away from a coyote, and this is true for adults as well. If you run away from a coyote or really any other predator like a wolf or a mountain lion or a bear, that can initiate their predatory chasing instinct. which could turn into an attack. Rarely, but it can. So that's why we never want to run away from a coyote. Also, it shows them that, we're nothing to be afraid of. So of course we don't want to do that either. In terms of kids, it's wonderful to teach them about coyotes and how to tell the difference between a coyote and a dog. But since kids are actually much more likely to be bitten by a dog, a better approach is just to teach kids in general, as you probably already do, to never approach or feed or pet any animal that they don't know unless an adult says it's okay. Okay, so once we have these conflicts going on, as I know we do have in Seal Beach, how do we solve them? Where do we go from here? Well, to effectively address coyote conflicts, we have to do two things, and we have to do both in order to solve coyote conflicts effectively. We have to change the problematic coyote behavior, of course, but we also have to change our behaviors that contribute to it. So in terms of changing our behavior, it's all about what we talked about so far, looking around our neighborhoods, reducing food attractants, taking precautions with our pets, talking to our children, all of those sorts of things. In terms of changing coyote behavior, that's where there are, a few more options and opinions. Sort of the traditional approach is to remove coyotes, whether that's on a large scale or a more individual scale, just removing the problematic ones. There's relocation, moving them somewhere else. Or hazing, which is a somewhat newer approach, which is essentially a way of training coyotes to stop these problematic behaviors. So relocation often sounds like a great idea. A lot of people don't necessarily want to kill coyotes, but they don't want them in their neighborhood either. So they think this is sort of a win-win scenario. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't work. It doesn't work with most wildlife, but especially with wildlife that are very territorial, like coyotes. They're just going to do whatever they can to get right back, and they're either going to come back, or what often happens is they'll get killed in the process. The Cook County Coyote Project monitored 12 coyotes that were relocated. None of them stayed where they were put. And I think all of them were killed. And that happens for a couple of reasons. Number one, where are we going to move these coyotes to? Coyotes are everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. You're not going to find a place that is empty and needing coyotes. So when you relocate coyotes somewhere else, the coyotes that are already there don't appreciate that. And often what happens is they get in a scuffle. Sometimes the relocated coyotes are killed that way, or they're sort of sent out. They're unfamiliar with where they are. They're unfamiliar with the traffic. They get killed, by traffic. So, this is often proposed as a more humane alternative to killing coyotes, but we actually find it less humane because often they get killed anyway, and they're so very stressed in the process. But also, it's not even a legal or viable option because you can't relocate rabies vector species within the state of California. So you're not even allowed to relocate them, and even if you could, there'd be a lot of expense involved in doing so. So this isn't an option. Yes?
It's very rare for a coyote to have rabies.
It is, but there's still a rabies vector species, so there's still regulations within the state that prohibit them from being moved around. So even though it is rare, that regulation is still in place. Okay, so the sort of traditional approach, as I mentioned, is to remove coyotes lethally. And one sort of the traditional approach was to try to reduce the coyote population, with the thought being that if you reduce the coyote population, then you'll reduce the number of conflicts. The problem with that, though, is that it's almost impossible to reduce the coyote population. Our USDA Wildlife Services program kills 80,000 coyotes per year and has been doing it, I think, for the last 100 years. And we have more coyotes today than we ever have before, in more parts of the country than we ever have before. So that's one indication that doesn't work. So certain states have bounty programs, and a lot of times they end up with more coyotes than they started with that. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens. And a lot of it has to do with coyote social structure. So again, in coyote groups, there's only one breeding female. When that group is disrupted because the female or another member is killed, what often happens is that the group will separate, and all the females in that group will go off and form their own groups. So whereas you would have only had one female per group breeding before, now you have all the females breeding. Also, once you reduce the coyote population somewhat, there's more resources available to the remaining coyotes. So the remaining coyotes that are left, the females have more resources to breed, which allows them to have larger litters of pups, so they'll have more pups, and the pups have an increased chance of survival. So you have more females having more pups with a better chance of survival, and so what often happens is after these removal programs, we see a population boom in coyotes, and you end up with more coyotes than you had to begin with. Also, anytime you remove a coyote, you are leaving behind an empty home range. And remember all of those transient coyotes out there floating around looking for a new home range? They're going to move right in. So you've got migration of coyotes in, and then you have more reproduction. So those are just a couple of the reasons why this approach just doesn't work. And even a lot of professional coyote trappers I've seen quoted as saying that this approach doesn't work. And there even have been studies to show or to try to determine how many coyotes you have to kill before you actually finally see a population reduction. This was a study in Colorado where they took a group of coyotes. They separated them into two groups. One they left as a control group, so they left them alone for 7 years. The other group, for 7 years, they killed each year 61 to 75% of the coyotes every year for 7 years. And then after 7 years, they stopped. Within just 8 months, the population size of those coyotes was back up to where they started. And that's because these coyotes were having twice the number of pups. The females were breeding at an earlier age. And interestingly, they were even having more female than male pups. So if you can imagine if the city of Seal Beach was to invest in removing 61 to 75% of the coyotes in the city, and then which would require a lot of resources and money, and then within 7 months you were back up to where you started, I don't think that most of you would consider that to be a good return on your investment. So most communities and wildlife managers have to this point acknowledged that the trying to reduce the population approach doesn't work to solve conflicts. So a better approach, of course, is to target only the problem coyotes, the ones that are attacking pets or causing other problems, and just removing those from the population. And that is a much better approach and a more humane one as well. That's easier said than done, though, because it's very difficult to catch coyotes. So in urban areas, often discharging firearms is not safe. It's much easier to identify and target and remove the particular problem coyote if you're able to use a firearm. But usually that's not safe or used in urban areas. So usually what are used are traps, which of course are non-selective by nature. So these traps are set out, and it is very difficult to catch a coyote in a trap. They are so incredibly smart and wary of human scent that for each trap that's set out, trappers will usually catch dozens of raccoons and opossums and maybe even pets. And so, and often the coyotes that do step into the traps are the younger, more inexperienced, dumber ones, who usually aren't the ones causing the problem in the first place. The ones that are causing the problem are often the smarter alpha coyotes, and those are even harder to catch in traps. So, there are some very skilled coyote trappers around, or in the country anyway, that are able to successfully target and remove particular problem coyotes, but they'll usually spend several weeks doing reconnaissance, tracking the coyotes, learning their movement patterns, making sure they've identified the particular problem coyote, making sure they're putting the trap where he and only he, moves, pre-baiting the trap, all of those sorts of things. So they'll typically spend several weeks and charge, the community several $1,000s to do that. But let's say that they do. Let's say that they do successfully remove the problem coyote. Well, now what? You've created an empty home range. You're going to have another coyote moving in. You might have more reproduction. But most importantly, you're not addressing the root cause of the conflict. Anytime there's a problem coyote, there's always a reason why. The vast majority of coyotes never bother people and pets, people are not even aware of them. Anytime there's a problem coyote, it's almost always because of food attractants or pets that are roaming around. And if that's still happening, the new coyote coming in can very easily become a problem coyote as well. Also, the other members of the coyote family group don't know why, their coyote friend is gone. They don't know that that coyote was killed because he was attacking pets or hanging around neighborhoods. All they know is that coyote was gone. I sort of liken this to training a dog. I recently adopted a puppy, and so I have this on the brain a lot of training. And so anyone that's trained a dog knows that, when you're training a dog, you have to catch them in the act of doing something. You can't come try to punish them an hour after chewing up the couch because they're not going to understand what you're punishing them for. Same thing with coyotes. If you have removed a coyote a week after it attacked a pet, the other coyotes have no idea. They have no idea, they're not learning anything. And obviously the coyote that did it didn't learn anything either, because he's dead. So it just doesn't teach coyotes anything. It doesn't teach us anything. And no matter how many coyotes we remove in Seal Beach, we're always going to have more coming in. We're always going to have coyotes around. So rather than continually going through the cycle of trapping and removing and trapping and removing, it's much easier and economical to train the coyotes that we already have here not to do these behaviors, to stop doing these behaviors and sort of train them of what we will accept and not accept. So the way to do that is through hazing. And hazing is essentially a way of training. It's a way of training coyotes, sort of similar to how you would train your dog, to not come into neighborhoods and not bother our pets. And the great part about hazing is that we can reinstill that natural fear of people that they naturally have. Okay, so at this point, I want to show you a fun video. This is by the city of Aurora, their Parks and Recreation in Colorado, and it will explain to you in a much funnier way than I can how to haze a coyote.
Coyotes are all around us.
Not just in the wild, but also in neighborhoods, cities, and suburbs.
And even if you've never seen one, you should still know what to do just in case you come across one.
Don't know what to do? Welcome to our instructional video on how to haze a coyote. In this video, we're going to show you how to haze a coyote. Let's talk about what hazing is first. Hazing is a simple thing that you can do if you're suddenly approached by a coyote, or if you see one somewhere in an area where it doesn't belong. Hazing keeps your community safe and protects you and the animal from harm. Everybody wins.
When we think of coyotes, we tend to think of this, or even this. But coyotes are actually a bit more like this, and they're coming into contact with people in urban areas more and more, so it's important we know more about them.
Here are some coyote facts to consider. No matter how big you think a coyote looks, most coyotes actually weigh less than 45 pounds. They're mostly skin and fur and legs, and really very little actual coyote. What do coyotes eat? Human beings are rarely on a coyote's shopping list. They mostly like to eat fruits, insects, snakes, squirrels, mice, goose eggs, and other things that actually make them helpful to our ecosystem.
For the most part, coyotes avoid people. We're loud, stinky, and kind of scary.
Hey! Woo!
And in places where coyotes come into contact with humans all the time, they could get used to us and no longer see us as something to avoid.
And this is especially true for urban coyotes. Luckily, coyotes are generally trainable, and this is where you come in. Like it or not, you help train your local coyotes by how you interact with them every time you see them. So, what is hazing?
I know what hazing is. We did it in my fraternity. All we need are some wigs, some lipstick, and a few goats.
No, not that kind of hazing.
Hello, I am the dog whisperer, Cesar Milan. We teach hazing to all of my clients at the Dog Psychology Center I have in Los Angeles, California.
Yeah, not quite. See, hazing is probably something you already know how to do. You probably use hazing techniques to keep your pet off the furniture or out of certain areas of your house.
Buster, what are you doing on that chair? Get off it there. Thank you.
So what happens if you run into a coyote? Who does the hazing? A ranger? Well, that would be nice, but if you're in an urban area like a supermarket parking lot, there probably aren't going to be a whole lot of rangers around to help you. How about this person? Surely she can help.
All right, sweetie. Well, I just finished folding your underwear, and I packed you a PB&J with the crust cut off. Would you like me to go out and haze that coyote for you before you go?
Sorry, but Mom is not going to be able to help you either. How about a firefighter, or a policeman, or a superhero, or an astronaut? You get the idea by now. No one is going to haze a coyote for you. If you encounter a coyote, you're going to need to handle it yourself. But here's the good news. It's not that difficult. So, what does hazing look like? In order to understand what hazing is, let's first see some examples of what hazing is not. No, that's not hazing. Well, that's scary, but that's not hazing either.
Go away now. Go on. Go away.
Nope, that's not hazing either.
Hey, it's a coyote! Hey, everybody, it's a coyote! Come here, come here, come here.
No, that's not hazing either. In fact, that's just stupid.
Go away, coyote! Go away!
A talking shrub isn't hazing either. So running, hiding, or even trying to be friendly to the animal, these are all things that you should not do.
So what does coyote hazing look like? Well, remember the acronym SMART. Stop, make, announce, repeat, and teach. Stop. Make yourself look big.
Hey!
Announce yourself.
Hey, hey, hey!
Repeat if necessary. And teach someone else in your community about coyote hazing.
If you have a pet with you, bring it closer to you or, if possible, into your arms. Next, what should I say when I haze? Remember, when it comes to hazing a coyote, it's not what you say, but how you say it.
You you
Yes, that's fine, that will work. It might be a little R-rated, but it will get results, which is ultimately what you want.
Go on now. Shoo!
Once again, it's not what you say, but how you say it. Give it a little gusto.
Go on! Get out of here! Go!
That's more like it. Sure, whatever you say doesn't matter, so it can even be gibberish. The only thing that matters is that it's a human voice, it's forceful, and directed at the coyote. Many people ask, can I use objects when I'm hazing a coyote? Sure, there's a lot of things you can use to make yourself look larger or make more noise, such as a rake, a golf club, pennies in a can, an air horn, a stick, even a water gun would work. The things you don't want to use are things like food, a lemon meringue pie, steak, anything that might coax the coyote near you.
Just remember, the goal with hazing the coyote is not to harm it, but rather to teach it to avoid people and specific places.
Next, when should I haze? Hazing a coyote should take place anytime a coyote engages you, approaches you, or you see one where it doesn't belong, such as a backyard, a playground, or just strolling down the sidewalk in the middle of the day. So, what's your excuse for not hazing? Many people don't feel comfortable with the idea of hazing a coyote. Here are some common excuses, and reasons why you shouldn't make them.
Well, I don't want to look like an idiot.
Do you really want coyotes hanging around your house or your neighborhood? If not, you might want to be willing to look a little silly. Besides, it's only going to be for a few seconds.
What if it gets mad and comes after me?
Don't worry, it's only a 30-pound canine. You're probably going to be able to scare it off just fine.
I don't know what to do.
That's why we've made this video. This isn't something they teach you in school.
Well, I don't think it will work.
It will work. If you follow all the instructions we just gave you, you'll be fine.
The coyote is my totem animal, and so we're on a spiritual journey together, and I don't want to hurt the coyote's feelings.
Next, is there any time I shouldn't haze a coyote? This is actually a very good question. There is one exception. Never haze a coyote that is cornered, injured, or with pups. In these cases, simply make yourself look larger, maintain eye contact, and slowly back away. So now you know how to do this, and you're prepared. And you can also share this information with friends and family, so that they are also prepared.
So that's how you haze a coyote. Be smart.
Coyote safety and awareness education is funded in part by Adams County Open Space and the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. For more information on coyote safety and awareness, please visit auroragov.org/nature.
You don't need to be an animal control or a police officer or a wildlife biologist. Everybody can haze a coyote, and everybody should haze a coyote. And it can simply be as easy as just yelling and waving your arms, go away coyote, just yelling at them. But there's lots of other fun ways you can haze as well, lots of fun props. My personal favorite is the air horn, nice and loud, that works really well. Whistles also are great. You can wear a whistle around your neck while you're walking your dog. This is a rescue whistle, which you can get at sporting goods stores. They're extra loud, so those work very well. You can make your own hazing tools. This is just a sippy cup with pennies inside, but it's nice and loud. You can bang pots and pans. You can use water guns, especially those, long-range super soaker water guns work really well. Water hose. You can open up an umbrella and close it. All of those things work really well. And, again, one of the other great parts about hazing is that we can actually change coyotes' behavior, and not just the coyote that you're changing, but the whole family group. So when you're hazing one coyote, you're really hazing the whole family group. Usually the coyote that you're hazing is usually one of the dominant ones, and the other ones will follow by example. So just like in the example I mentioned before, you have one coyote in the neighborhood who learns they can eat food, and then you have 2, and then you have 5. This sort of thing works in reverse. You have 5 coyotes in the neighborhood, you haze 1, then you have 3, you haze them again, then you have none. The message spreads really quickly throughout the coyote community. So there are just a few simple tips that you have to know in order to haze a coyote correctly. The most important one is that you have to have a connection with the coyote for it to work. The coyote has to see you and know that whatever you're doing is directed at him. So that's why, for example, like the video showed, you don't want to be hiding behind a bush or, waving out the 3rd floor of your house. You want to make sure the coyote sees you. Also, honking car horns are not effective. Number 1, because they hear traffic noise all the time, of course. Number 2, they just don't associate that with a person. So you want to make sure they can see you and know that what you're doing is directed at them. If you are outside with a small pet or a small child, again, you want to pick them up and kind of put them behind you. If it's a larger pet or child, bring them in close and put them behind you. That way the coyote is focused on you and you can scare them away. Now this is the one where a lot of people unknowingly go wrong with hazing. The first time a coyote is hazed, especially if he's very habituated, they generally will react in one of 2 ways. They will either just stand there and look at you, or they might run away a short distance and stand there and look at you. And they're doing that because they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're testing us. They're trying to see what happens next. And so if you're yelling at a coyote and he just stands there and look at you, and then you decide, well, that didn't work, and you go back inside or run away or walk away, what have you taught that coyote? You've taught him that all he has to do is wait a moment, and then you'll leave, and he can go right back to whatever he was doing. Or again, they might also run away a short distance and then stop and look at you. So what you have to do if this happens, and again, this is common. This is common when a coyote is hazed the first time. It doesn't mean that hazing doesn't work or that this coyote is too far gone and aggressive and has to be removed. It just means he's never been hazed before or hasn't been hazed properly before. So what you need to do is actually intensify your hazing until the coyote runs away. And the easiest and best way to do this is to actually run towards the coyote. So remember that coyotes are hardwired to run away from a threat. So when you're running towards them, yelling and waving your arms, they're going to respond by running away. I've never heard of a case where someone has hazed a coyote and they've come at them. So, don't be afraid. You can run towards a coyote and scare them off, and that will work. Having said that, I know there are people that won't feel comfortable doing that, and that's okay. You don't have to run towards the coyote. Just keep doing it. Get louder, do a couple of different techniques, get people on the street involved. If there's anyone else outside, just keep hazing the coyote until they run away. And they will. They'll run away. A lot of people ask me, what's the best tool for hazing coyotes? Is it a whistle or an umbrella or an air horn? And the truth is, it doesn't really matter. pick your favorite method, or better yet, a couple of your favorite different methods. But we don't want everybody to be doing the same thing. We don't want everybody in Seal Beach to be blowing whistles at coyotes, because they might learn, eventually, okay, these whistles don't really hurt me. So it's good to have some variety. But actually, much more important than that is having a variety of people doing it. That's why we're here tonight talking to all of you. We're not just talking to police and animal control. Animal control knows how to do this, and they do it. But coyotes learn very quickly what animal control officers look like, what their uniform looks like, what their car and truck looks like. And before they even get out of the truck, the coyotes are long gone. And of course, you probably know, if you were to call animal control and say, hey, there's a coyote in my yard, will you come haze it? Of course, 99 times out of 100, by the time they get there, the coyote's going to be gone. So, we don't want coyotes to just be afraid of animal control officers. We want them to be afraid of you and me and everybody in this room. You are the ones that the coyotes are interacting with. We want them to be afraid of you. So that's why we need everybody to do it. You only want to use these techniques when you actually have the connection with the coyote. So for example, if you decide, if you see a coyote sometimes on a certain trail in a park you jog on, and you decide you're going to take a whistle with you, and you're going to blow it at the coyote when you see them, that's perfect. But if you decide, well, sometimes I see a coyote on this trail, so I'm just going to blow the whistle every time I walk in this trail just in case, you don't want to do that, because then you'll just habituate the coyote to the whistle. So only when you actually see the coyote and have that connection. And then finally, this might sound like a lot of work, but really, usually after that first time, it usually gets easier and then even easier. And usually only 2 to 3 times per coyote or per that whole family group is all that it takes to spread the message. And if you do ever encounter more than one coyote, if you encounter 2 or 3 or even more, you would haze them the same way. There's always going to be a dominant coyote, and when that coyote runs away, the rest will follow. If you are seeing a group of coyotes, and this is happening a lot, they probably are viewing something as a threat. So it's a territorial behavior. So if you are walking with your dog and you keep seeing a group of coyotes, that's an indication in the springtime there might be a den of pups nearby. So if it's possible, if it's during the springtime, maybe just adjust your route and walk a different way. It's only going to be 4 to 6 weeks before the coyotes move on to another spot. Okay, so again, you don't ever want to haze an obviously sick or injured coyote. This is, of course, when you want to call animal control. You don't want to attempt this yourself. You also want to make sure they have an escape route, of course. So you don't want to haze them into a corner. You want to make sure they have somewhere to go. And then again, as far as kids go, they can use all these techniques. They should be big and loud, but we probably wouldn't encourage them to run towards the coyote, but they can slowly back away and yell for an adult. And again, just making sure they don't run away. Okay, so I just have a few examples for how hazing has worked. These are actual real-world examples where it has solved coyote problems. These are examples from the Denver area. So this is a coyote, well, this was a problem that was happening in a park called Bible Park in Denver. I'm sure you have lots of parks like this here. This is actually a photo from Huntington Beach of an actual coyote that was doing this. A very habituated coyote that was lounging in a park in plain view of people, very habituated. The coyote group was attacking pets, including large pets. They were stalking the runners on the trails, causing a lot of problems. And this is a situation where a lot of communities would shut down the park and put out traps to kill the coyotes. But the city of Denver had done this many times before, and they just kept, having the same cycle. And so they decided to implement a new plan where they used hazing as their primary tool for changing problematic coyote behavior. So they sent out their park staff who were trained in hazing techniques, and they went around every morning for 3 weeks and hazed the coyotes. They used pots and pans, whistles, air horns, all those sorts of things. And after that 3-week period of time, they didn't see any more of this behavior from the coyotes. No more attacks on pets, no more laying around in the park, no more following people. People in the park were no longer seeing coyotes. And there actually were people in the park who were angry and calling, City Hall and wanting to know what did they do with the coyotes, because they liked seeing the coyotes in the park. And the truth is the coyotes are still there. They were still in the park. The park staff would see them in the early morning hours hunting for rodents, but they were just no longer showing themselves to people, which is exactly what they should do. Also, of course, one of the first things they did was look around and look at why this was happening. And they did find there was a trash issue and some people had been feeding coyotes in the park. So they also put an end to that. Okay, this is an example of a Denver resident, could be like any of you here tonight, who had a small pet and had been seeing a coyote in his neighborhood and was concerned about it. So he came to a session like this. He learned all about hazing. And he went home, and one evening he was about to let his dog outside, but he looked outside first and he saw a coyote across the street in his neighbor's driveway. So he said, okay, I'll try this hazing thing. He left his dog inside, he opened up his front door, stepped onto his porch, started yelling and waving his arms. You know, go away, coyote. And the coyote just stood there and looked at him. And so he said, okay, you know, they talked about this. This is where I need to intensify my hazing. So he continued yelling and waving his arms and ran towards the coyote. And he actually got within 6 feet of the coyote before the coyote took off and ran away. But then he did, he ran away. A few evenings later, he saw the coyote again. This time, he opened up his front door, stepped onto his porch, started yelling and waving his arms. This time, as soon as he started yelling, the coyote took off and ran away. The last time he saw the coyote, all he did was open up his front door, and the coyote took off and ran away. And this is a pretty typical story that we hear. You know, the first time was more challenging to haze that coyote. You know, a lot of people might have given up and said, well, that didn't work. But he remembered he needed to intensify the hazing. And, you know, no, most people don't need to get within 6 feet of a coyote for it to work. You know, and he didn't have to do that. He could have just continued doing it or intensifying it. But the first time it was more challenging. Second time it was easier. Third time, almost no effort at all. And that was the last time he saw the coyote. And you can imagine if his neighbors had gotten involved, you know, probably even would have went even quicker. Last example, this is from an elementary school, again in the Denver area. There were coyotes that were hanging around in elementary school. I include this because, you know, I imagine there's not, you know, it's alarming to parents to find coyotes hanging around playgrounds and schools, and the implication often is that the coyotes are waiting to attack the children, which is what the parents in this case thought as well. The coyotes were lurking around the school. They were also peering through the fence at the children at recess, which of course looked very menacing. And again, this is a situation where a lot of schools probably would have shut down the school and set out traps, but they didn't do that. The first thing they did, which I always encourage, is to do some reconnaissance work. So they talked to the kids, they talked to the school staff, and what they learned pretty quickly is that the kids had been feeding the coyotes through the fence at recess. So that explains that behavior. So they put a stop to that, they did an educational program for the kids, they got the parents in the neighborhood involved, and they started hazing the coyotes. This was in 2009, they've had no problem since. So that was effective. Okay, so what are you going to do if you see a coyote? A lot of you said you've already seen one. And those of you that haven't, you might see one in the future. Well, again, remember, it's not necessarily abnormal to see them during the daytime. If you have a pet or child with you, pick them up or put them behind you, and then you're going to haze them. All of the techniques that we talked about tonight. Then you always want to, after you haze the coyote, you always want to stop and think to yourself, why did this happen in the first place? You know, is there anything in my yard that attracted this coyote in here? Or is there anything in my neighborhood that attracted this coyote in here? You know, maybe you can nicely talk to your neighbors and share with them what you learned here and let them know that, you know, without realizing it, they are encouraging coyotes to come into the neighborhood and possibly endangering pets. And to get them to haze too, because again, the more people that are hazing, the more quickly, you know, we can train our neighborhood coyotes to stop doing these behaviors and abide by our rules. So just to recap, to prevent coyote conflicts, we have to change our behavior, reduce food attractants, take precautions with pets, talk to our kids, and we do, of course, have to change problematic coyote behavior. And we found the most effective way to do that is through hazing, but we all have to work together to do that. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions. We have a lot of this information and more on our website. And I also have my card here if you'd like to follow up with me. But at this point, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Sounds like coyotes are pretty trainable. How do you train people not to attack, you know?
Yes, that's always the hardest part.
Neighbor, we told her not to do it, she just leaves it out anyway.
Yeah, it's always harder to train people than coyotes, but there is a wildlife, there is a ban on that here. So if you haven't already called animal control, I would suggest doing that, and they can come find the person. Or they could talk to her. A lot of times people don't realize that leaving food out is actually detrimental to wildlife. A lot of times people do it because they like wildlife, so it just takes some explaining. But I would call animal control, and they would know the best way to go about that. Yes?
How does composting attract coyotes?
Yeah, so it can, especially if there's meat or dairy in the compost. So we always recommend do not have any meat or dairy in the compost. And then, the best way would be to use an enclosure for the compost so that no wildlife can get to it. But as long as there's no meat or dairy, I wouldn't think that would be a big attractant, but it's possible. Other questions?
Coyotes eat bread. I live near a duck farm.
Do they eat bread? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Does anything not eat bread?
Throw out tons of bread.
Oh, dear.
Overrun with ducks.
Yeah, and that's bad for ducks, too. I mean, it can actually cause them to develop something called angel wing, which is a permanent, deformation of their wings, and they can't fly. So, we definitely just, I know. Yeah, I know, it's really tough. It's really tough sometimes to get people to stop feeding wildlife. Yeah, but we found the best approach is to explain to them why it's bad for the wildlife versus why it's illegal or what the fine is or that sort of thing. But it's challenging, I know. Other questions? Yes.
Coyotes have learned to coexist with humans and in fact thrive, and the coyote population is becoming larger every year. At what point do we reach a saturation, an overpopulation of coyote?
Yeah, well, wildlife in general are really good at actually regulating their populations themselves. So when I talked about earlier, I talked about how when there are more resources available, coyotes will have more pups. The same works in reverse. So when the coyote population reaches a large enough point, there'll be less resources available, so the coyotes will have less pups and less chance of survival for the pups. So they do have their own self-regulating mechanism there. At the same time, when coyote populations get large, we often see an outbreak of diseases such as mange and that sort of thing that will reduce the population.
So it's more likely for them to die from mange than it is from rabies.
Much more rare, yes. And in terms of coyote conflicts, it's really not an issue of the number of coyotes because, we found, for example, one statistic I didn't share is that, out of 800 coyotes that had been radio collared in Chicago, only one of them ever attacked a pet. So even if the numbers are slightly larger here, the vast majority of coyotes are never bothering us. It's just a few. So it's not a numbers issue. It's just usually a few coyotes that are causing the problem. So. But yeah, they do have a naturally regulating.
Well, about 15 years ago, you could see a coyote going through trash cans in this area in the evening, especially those outside restaurants, but you don't see that anymore. They're not even wasting their time at the trash cans. They're more interested in the pets. They're more interested, they're less interested in the rodents. We still have a rodent problem.
Well,
The rodent problem
they can't
hasn't
do it
gone
all.
away.
They
But
can't eat
they're
all.
less interested in trash, and they're more interested in domestic pets. So we're seeing an increase in that. They are adjusting. So.
Again, I mean, these could be just a few coyotes that are responsible for killing pets. By and large, most of them are probably not bothering pets. But yes.
Isn't the statistic on that there's, I think you had actually have up here from Cook County, less than 1%
Yeah.
of their diet is, I think that includes dogs, dogs, pets. So they're not attacking pets. I mean, the
Not
amount that
Cook
they,
County.
well, Cook County's a lot bigger than here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it does happen. I know there have been incidents in Seal Beach, but again, it's usually a small number of coyotes that are doing it. And I mean, obviously the biggest problem are having unattended pets running around in the first place. So if we don't solve that issue, we're never going to be able to solve the coyote issue.
There's
Yes.
this kind of demonic caricature of the coyote, excuse me, my word choice, bitch in heat, attracting a domestic dog back into the den where the pack kills it. You must have heard that.
I hear those rumors all the time. So you're saying they lured the dog in to kill it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering.
Wait, you're saying the coyotes in heat and they lure the dog in?
Yeah.
No, I've never heard of that. I mean,
This is something that everybody says, well, you know what they do? They attract the dog, and they pretend to play with it, and get it back into the den, and then they all, well, of course, they don't even hunt it that way. So.
right. I mean, I have heard, so a variation sort of what you're saying is that they lure a dog in and they attack the dog. I never heard the heat aspect of what you were talking about. But no, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think if that happens, it's generally because that, again, is an unattended dog that they view as a threat to their pups in some way. So that could be, especially if it's a larger dog, if there is an attack on a larger dog, it's usually by a group of coyotes. So even though they don't hunt in packs, they defend their territory in packs. So when we see attacks on larger dogs, which is almost always a territory issue of a mate or pups, it is a group of coyotes that do it. Yeah, so coy dogs, mixes between coyotes and dogs are rare, and they usually don't last past one generation because the male dogs don't stick around and help raise the pups, or whatever they're called, the the coy dog offspring, and so they often don't survive. And even if they do survive, their mating schedule doesn't sync up with either dogs or coyotes, so we don't see too many of those. Yes?
Communities that are having trouble with their deer,
Mm-hmm.
is that because the wolves are no longer around? The coyotes don't take care of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. Wolves have a big impact on deer populations, and coyotes. There's a bit of debate. There's a bit of a debate about how much coyotes regulate deer populations, but I think in general they don't have a very big impact. They don't eat adult deer. They will only eat the fawns, and that doesn't have a great impact on population reduction. So yeah, I think what you're saying, your question is, yeah, wolves have a great impact on deer population, and coyotes do not. Yeah, and where there are wolves, there generally aren't coyotes. So. If we had wolves around, we probably wouldn't have coyotes. That's a whole different issue. Any other?
So in other words, if you really want to get rid of the coyote,
Well, then you have a whole nother, yeah, good luck with that one. Okay, well, if anyone has any further questions, I'll be here, but thank you so much. Please share this with your family, neighbors, and friends, and I hope it was helpful. Thank you.